I used to live in an apartment with a bunch of cockroaches and a guy named Rob. Good guy. We'd smoke hookah and play chess. Rob was a vegetarian. And I don't actually know why, whether it was for health reasons or ethical concerns or he was in some kind of religious startup. I don't think it ever came up, actually. But I do recall that people would get really mad at him without explanation when he brought up that he was a vegetarian at barbecues. We were at a barbecue one time, and a guy said, "Hey, Rob, can I grab you a hamburger?" To which Rob said, "No, thanks. I'm vegetarian." And that guy said, "Oh, so I'm some kind of murderer then, huh?" Which struck me as a bit of an overreaction. As in, that guy flipping hamburgers seemed to have a problem with meat or vegetarianism or both or something, and Rob accidentally stepped into whatever bear trap he had floating around his mind. In retrospect, our neighbor did have a problem with meat and or vegetarianism, I think. And what Rob stepped into was a big old bubbling pot of cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable feeling we will be plunging into today. My guest is going to give you a better definition of cognitive dissonance than I can, but I'll tell you what it feels like to me. If my brain wore underwear, cognitive dissonance is that feeling that the underwear is too tight. That vague but deeply uncomfortable sensation my brain wants to alleviate. Sometimes it's vaguely tight, to where I'm just a little uncomfortable. It shrank in the dryer, but I can deal with it. Sometimes it's very tight, painfully tight, and I will do anything to cut that elastic band loose and let my lobes breathe freely again. In this instance, lobes refers to my brain. I definitely have cognitive dissonance. About meat specifically. Like Angry Hamburger Man. I'm an omnivore. I eat meat, plants, and cheese. Mostly cheese. But also meat. I had a chuck roast just last night, so I'm not a vegetarian. But at the same time, I also love animals. And while I don't think there's anything unethical about eating meat, or I should say the act of merely consuming and ingesting meat, I don't think there's anything inherently immoral about it, like it's trife or something. I do think there's something unethical about torturing animals. I don't like the idea of animals suffering. So, for example, according to my moral constraints, hunting and eating a deer would not be immoral because the deer presumably had a decent life and a quick death. So when my cousins go deer hunting, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And if they bring back deer jerky that they make for me and for themselves, we can eat it. There's no problem with that. Ditto fishing. If I go fishing and I don't know how to clean a fish, but theoretically, if I could catch a fish and I cleaned the fish and then I cooked the fish, I think that would be fine. I would really see no problem with that. But that's animal living a good life and a quick death. If somebody captured an animal and locked it in a basement or a very small cage and didn't let it run around or have friends and confined it to an existence with a very low quality of life, a life that was predominantly suffering, well, that would be horrible. I wouldn't want somebody to do that. I would say that would be tantamount to animal torture, which I am very much against. But then if at the end of that process, a guy on a conveyor belt whacked said animal in the head with a sledgehammer, and a couple of weeks later I got to eat a cheeseburger? Well, how would me eating it make it any better? Wouldn't it make it worse, since I would be funding this process? Now, that's just me. When I really think about it, I have to admit that my own ethical precepts are at odds with my diet, which makes me very uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable with this fact, listener. I have to either change my diet, change my values, or admit that I am a hypocrite or to some extent a monster, which makes me really dislike stupid old Rob, making me consider the ethical ramifications of eating something which is inarguably delicious, even though I haven't even talked to him in 2 years. Kind of makes me want to yell at him at a barbecue. Kind of makes me want to make Rob go away. Your mileage may vary. Certainly your ethics and your diet might. If what you've heard so far, however, makes you uncomfortable, if what I just described earlier with the conveyor belt and the guy braining an animal and animal torture, but hamburgers are delicious, and right now, you don't feel good, you feel uncomfortable right now, you feel that elastic band tightening around your brain, then congratulations. You also have cognitive dissonance just like me. That feeling you have right now is what we're going to be talking about today, is what we're going to be exploring today, and the ramifications of that writ large when we're dealing with culture and politics. So keep in mind, that feeling, so far, is just us talking about hamburgers, getting worked up about hamburgers, and exiling stupid old dumb-faced Rob from my barbecue so that I don't have to confront cognitive dissonance again. But if that's just hamburgers, what might we be doing in politics? That's what we're going to explore today, right here on the Political Orphanage. Okay. Welcome, Adaam Levin-Areddy, host of Uncertain Things. Good to see you.
Good to see you. You can't see me, actually.
I can't see you, but I trust that you're there.
Yeah.
And before we get into cognitive dissonance, you want to tell everybody how we know each other?
Oh, but no, you have the euphonious radio voice. You should tell the story.
Very well. I was at a party on Friday, as I am wont to do, being the social animal I am, and I had extended an invitation to one Batya Ungar-Sargon, who came on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I found absolutely delightful and was beloved hither and yon by listeners of my show. However, she couldn't come to this party because it was a Friday and she's a Jew. And we decided we'll meet on Saturday after sunset, after the Sabbath is concluded. And you and I are talking at this party. We both happen to be there. And then at one moment, you get this light bulb moment above your head and go, I am the voice of Batya. I am supposed to coordinate with you, because it hadn't occurred to me that I couldn't just text her because she couldn't do that on the Sabbath either. So you and I met with you as Batya's proxy. You selected a restaurant for the both of us, and then were kind enough to meet us there to make sure that everything went well, and then joined myself and Batya and her husband for dinner.
Yes. Although from my perspective, it was you who weaseled into my Batya time.
Oh, okay. I'll take
by
that.
Sheer being in New York, which, as if that's special.
I will be sure to ask your permission next time.
There are 9 million people in New York. Is that we should celebrate everybody who comes to visit? Come on.
That's a good point. Good point. Fair enough. I apologize for slinking into your post-Sabbath rule, post-Sabbath meal.
Protocol session.
While we were waiting, because all the same, she still wasn't able to check her messages until we were already there, so we still had an hour of lead time. We were hanging out at a bar in Midtown Manhattan, and you said that you seek out cognitive dissonance. And I immediately thought, bullshit. There's no way. No one likes the feeling of cognitive dissonance. But now you and I have spoken. We've got to know each other. I think you might actually do that. So would you mind telling everybody what is cognitive dissonance, first and foremost? And then after that, why do you seek it out? What does that look like?
So I won't be able to do as good a job as Andrea. So
who was going to join us, but she had technical errors, and so is not going to be joining us.
But cognitive dissonance is that tension that we feel when we are faced with some inconsistency. Usually an inconsistency between how we perceive something, how we perceive ourselves, and some other signals that we're getting from the world. Or sometimes it's two different ideas that we have in our mind that are just really irreconcilable, and our brains don't like it. We get angry, we get frustrated, and I think the point of the theory, which is, from behavioral psychology, that the lengths that humans would go to in order to allay that inconsistency are enormous. There is very little that humans won't do to be able to feel back at ease and have the world be back in order. And the example that I think about a lot, because this is me. I grew up being a very rabid environmentalist, and I like not seeing stuff pop up in the middle of the ocean, plastic stuff.
Okay, sure.
But I also don't like doing things. So when I have to sort out my recyclables, I say, really, the New York authorities aren't really doing a good job. I did some reporting about this in the past. I know that half of the recyclables get thrown into the normal landfill anyway. So I don't really need to do this. So this little tension between me wanting to do good by the world and me also wanting to be lazy gets reconciled by it's actually New York's fault. Solution.
Right.
Other people who might want to spend more money would get a bigger garbage bin or recyclable bin and say, okay, instead of having to recycle every week, I do it every 2 weeks. But you either by action or by rationalization or sometimes by sheer denial, you strive to resolve those inconsistencies in your life because we're just not comfortable with them.
Or you redefine the parameters of the stakes.
Right.
You could say, you know what, actually, I don't like whales. One ate a prophet one time, vomited him up. I don't care about that. I'm anti-whale, right? And I think you're right. We do go to great lengths. The feeling of cognitive dissonance is not a good one. First of all, it's interesting in that I feel like cognitive dissonance is tricky in that very rarely do I have the mental wherewithal to state, I am experiencing cognitive dissonance at this time. Now, if theoretically, if you and I had not hit it off the other night over drinks and we started arguing with each other, it would have been pretty easy for me to articulate that and go, you know what, this guy's arguing with me and I feel angry. I feel like I'm being attacked. I don't like him. That I can wrap my head around that, right? But let's say theoretically that I have this very specific map of the world. And you're not even contradicting that. You're giving an alternate map of the world that doesn't jive with my map. It's just going to be this vaguely unsettling feeling. And I may not even be able to tell you why I have that dis-ease.
I think that's what ails a lot of the kind of the American discourse, and I think a lot, especially the college discourse in the US, because a lot of students encountering the polite conservative really don't know how to handle hearing somebody who is not a maniac, who is clearly rational, who clearly knows how to speak their language, saying things that are completely normal, and yet just does not jive with what they were either taught or what they came in believing. And because there is just no capacity, there is diminishing capacity, I think, in the American political discourse to tolerate that inconsistency, to sustain this anxiety and live with it. The result is the opposite. The result is to lash out. The result is to turn into the inner feral animal and pounce back at anybody who is just shedding light on those little uncertainties, inconsistencies, or areas where we maybe didn't even spend time thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I think your choice there, feral, is actually very apropos. Like I was, in preparation for our discussion, Adaam, I was thinking about this. Why does cognitive dissonance bother us so much? Because it clearly does. And I don't think that it's rooted in ego. I don't think that it's, I have this thing and you're presenting me with an alternate thing and that's insulting to me. I don't think it's coming from that space. I think it's straight up evolutionary. I think that in an evolutionary capacity, my actions need to be congruous with my reality. Because if reality does not match my actions, I'm going to die, or I'm not going to reproduce, or I'm not going to eat right. So I need to be acting in accordance with the universe as I understand it. And on an animalistic level, that means if I think it's a flat field rather than a curved field, I need to act accordingly. Or
right.
I think there's a tiger in there, whatever the thing is, right?
But let's be careful. Let's be careful that capacity doesn't ensure that we have a true model of reality. We don't have veridiction. It means that we have a usable model of reality.
Right. You know what? That's actually a very good point. That's right, because we're not wired to perceive reality as it is, but rather to see it in an advantageous manner to reproduce and eat.
To have a usable interface.
Yes. So when reality or when a useful reality is not congruous with my actions, that's just immediately going to fill me with unease as an animal, because on some level, I understand that what I'm doing is not in sync with the world around me, and that that's going to lead to problems. And so what I need to do, probably on an instinctive level, is adjust my behavior. But as rational Homo sapiens, we also have the ability to adjust our worldview. And so we can basically do one of those two things. Well, there's three things we can do, really. We can either adjust our worldview and say, oh, this map that I have of the landscape is incorrect. I must update my map. Or, alternately, the map appears to be correct. I must adjust my behavior to be in accordance with this map. Or, on another level, I can just kill you. I can kill you, Adaam. That way, I don't have to be confronted with this anymore. And now the map and my actions appear to be congruous with one another, and I can go about my day.
And that latter solution is becoming increasingly attractive in the political sphere.
Okay, so noting that we have this probably instinctive wiring to dislike this dissonance between worldview and actions, how do you have any steps you take, Adaam, to just be aware of when that's happening? Like I am kind of aware on occasion when I have cognitive dissonance, and I'm trying to train myself to go, okay, I have cognitive dissonance. Maybe this is something that I need to explore. But I don't feel that I'm doing it on the regular. Are there any tools you have that you've developed that enable you to be cognizant of this?
So I don't have five ways to embrace cognitive dissonance and live within the inconsistencies. But the first thing that precedes even the discussion of cognitive dissonance is what you mentioned about ego, that it's not about ego. At first, as every expert in de-escalation would say, try to disassociate yourself a little bit from any conversation. So when you're feeling that you're getting attacked personally, instead of leaning in and defending your personhood in the conversation, take a step backwards and maybe it's not about you. And that already gives you more room to tolerate either your own mistakes or the incongruent opinions of somebody else and think of the conversation a little more coolly. So that's always a good starting point.
Right, and to interject there, a very good way to do that is to, if you were arguing with somebody or you're in a conversation with somebody where you're beginning to have juxtaposed positions, rather than saying, I think this, be very honest if you encounter the information elsewhere and go, I just read this book by Thomas Sowell,
oh my God.
and he says this. What do you think about that? That way I am now, and the truth is I probably didn't come up with the thing I'm talking about. Chances are good I read it somewhere or somebody told me it. So it's not about me now. I am merely the interlocutor between these ideas. You can attack this idea, you're no longer attacking me.
This is a completely I don't know if completely irrelevant, but this is a total segue, but I cheer and celebrate what you just said. But not necessarily because of how much it helps you to disassociate yourself from the argument, because I think that if people are committed to jousting on a personal level, you can even take quotation as a personal assault. You're also adding a layer of you're better read than I am, or you know more than me, and it will also be seen as a slight. But where I totally agree with you, and this is something that throws me off and actually aggravates me, is when I hear people talk with either cliches or the words and constructions of other people. And you can tell when that happens. You can hear, I have a friend whom I love, but every once in a while we'd argue, and I say, "This is not you talking. I'm talking to Ben Shapiro. I can hear Ben Shapiro filtering through your lips," and it bothers me not only as on the creative side, because I try at least to. I feel uncomfortable even repeating the same story twice when I tell it to a group of friends. I try to I don't want to plagiarize myself, let alone others.
Freshen up the lie, make the lie better.
Exactly. If you're gonna be bullshitting, at least be creative about it. But on as a heuristic, it's useful to avoid repetition, because repetition gives you complacency about your arguments. The more you say it, the more comfortable you are with whatever it is you're saying, and the less critical, which means that by the time that you have recited something that you've heard in a podcast that was a quote of somebody else's podcast, you are basically absorbing uncritical what's the word? Truism and spreading it. It's unhealthy. It's not good for any type of discourse. So completely down with that. Take a moment to, whether or not we're talking about cognitive dissonance, just always good idea that if you feel like you're stuck for words and you're trying to grasp at something that you've read somewhere or listened to somewhere and are just about to introduce it into the fray, stop and take a moment to rephrase it. And as you do so, you're already creating something a little new, a little more nuanced, a little more clever, because you have to critically think through what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think the ability to, it's so difficult to climb out from under our biases. Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind talks about how the way we're wired, it takes very little data to confirm what we already think. It takes tremendous data to overturn that. So let's say theoretically, I am.
That's the 1 to 3 ratio.
Is they actually have a ratio?
I think
for it?
so, but I might be mixing it from another.
Interesting.
I think so. I think that's to overcome biases and bad ideas.
Right.
It's obviously it's a heuristic. It's not a real thing, but
right.
It's a tool.
But it's a good rule of thumb. But like, say for example, like I'm a very pro free trade guy. Comparative advantage, rising tide lifts all boats.
No.
Yay! Protectionism's bad. I know, who'd have thought, right? So for me, noting this, if you have a piece of data that contradicts what I think, and you go, well, hey, like actually. What you're talking about is not working at all in Michigan, and you point this out. First of all, it's going to immediately invoke cognitive dissonance in me. I am going to want to try to negate this somehow and figure out how it actually does fit in with my existing framework. And if you have so much data, eventually you're like, well, also this, and this. Eventually you might actually get me to change my mind. It's possible. But at the same time, it's not as if that information has the same moral weight when it's coming from the other side. So if you go, yeah, I agree. Look at this example in Vermont. Vermont's lobsters I don't know if Vermont's landlocked or not. Vermont's lobsters cost way less because of free trade. And I go, there you go, right? I just need that one data point to go, I'm right, my worldview is correct, but I need lots and lots and lots of data points to overcome it. And when you introduce those data points, you are going to trip that cognitive dissonance, and I'm going to want to ignore it or explain it away or do some kind of hand-waving to make this irritant get outside of my worldview.
So I guess that takes me to my second rule of thumb for dealing with this is just telling yourself, and at some point it becomes true, like all mantras, I guess, that being... And you know what? I'm going to change that. It's not even telling yourself. It's reminding yourself that there is something really fun about being proven wrong. There is a lot of fun, tickling pleasures about, oh, I'm wrong. I've been completely embarrassed in a public setting, but I also just kind of maybe learned something interesting. Or now, if you really want to be mercenary about it, now I have I had my arguments from before, but now I have a new argument in my tool. So next time I argue with a new person, I have 2 different ways to approach my cases. So your arsenal just got better if you just want to go into it for the game. But if you're in it for intellectual curiosity, then you've just create a new chapter in your mind that you need to reckon with, and that's a good feeling. That's why people like learning sometimes when the teacher isn't awful. People are driven by curiosity. People go to certain types of fields because they want to explore and study and learn new shit. So that appetite gets satisfied every time that you're shown to be wrong about something.
Right, and I think it's very odd that in our culture the word disillusioned is a negative one. Like I find that so bizarre. Like if I was disillusioned. I was a Baptist, but I was disillusioned with it. Or I was an environmentalist and I was disillusioned with it. Whatever the thing is, disillusioned always conveys a sense of loss or betrayal.
Nostalgia to the illusion.
Yeah, and you don't want it, but it's like, but isn't that good? You were under an illusion and you were liberated from that illusion. That's a good.
Right.
If it is in fact illusionary. If in
Illusory?
fact if it is an illusion that you're suffering under, then it would be good that you were liberated from this thing.
Yeah, and I mean that probably goes to the the general juvenile nature of American culture and the sanctity of the naive lamb, the sanctity of adolescence, all the temple of youth. That disillusionment means you've just gone one step into deeper into the fallenness of the world, right? I don't like it.
And there's the, like, to bring back to Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff, they talk about in the it's the closing of the American mind, that there is a
Coddling.
kind of generational thank you, the coddling of the American mind. There has been a kind of generational shift that's occurred where there was more of a emphasis in education in my generation back. And I'm very hesitant whenever we get into generational warfare to become a codger. But
those darn kids!
More of an emphasis on, you are going to encounter contrary ideas. How do you best grapple with them? And there does seem to have been a shift to where ideas themselves are dangerous and somehow innately offensive when you are confronted with a contrary idea. And a lot of upper-level education is sort of building scaffolding to protect you from ideas that would emotionally rankle you. Whereas the older model is, it's all about being emotionally rankled. You want to plunge into these ideas.
So another tool in embracing the dissonance is, something that existed in intellectual culture for since forever. It existed in ancient China. It existed in ancient Greece, and obviously during the Enlightenment. That idea of devil's advocacy is a valuable tool that was always taken for a useful way to not just have a better conversation in general, but also to really push and stress test your own intuitions about things. And in the process of actually doing proper devil's advocacy, you have, if you're doing it seriously, to exist within the cognitive dissonance. Because presumably, if you're doing devil's advocacy, you don't believe, at least at the starting point, in the argument that you're presenting. But in the process, if you really are putting yourself out there and not just playing pure sophistry, but actually trying to be the best version of the argument you're putting forward. And to be fair, actually, you can also do that through sophistry. Even if you only want to win the argument. By the time that you become this champion of a view that you didn't believe in at the beginning, on some level you start believing it, even if you're going to snap back to your original view by the time the argument is over. You have created a module in your brain that can sustain, can accept, can tolerate that worldview, that other worldview that until now you thought to be wrong.
Yeah. One of the best things that I did during my adolescence is I was on the high school debate team. I'll add I was the captain of the high school debate team, and something of an intellect to be feared in the Halcyon Western District of Oklahoma debate circuit.
The first moment I saw you in that little in your vest and your tie, I just knew he led a debate team. Yeah, it's just
that guy was captain of the debate team, and he was not getting laid while he was doing it. I could definitely radiate that. But it was a really wonderful thing to have during the formative years, because it trained me, I think, like many attorneys get, to be able to advocate for a position that I myself do not think, and not have it be immoral or have it be hypocritical or duplicitous while you do it. Like in debate, there's various forms of debate in high school, and perhaps they've altered since I was there. But you would say like a debate topic we would have would be resolved. Decentralized government is better at averting tyranny. And I probably do agree with that premise, right? But half the time, I would have to take the alternate perspective, and I would have to go, no, you're going to get petty tyrants and Jim Crow laws and that kind of thing. But I couldn't. It would be improper and dumb of me to have gone, hello, I represent the opposing team, but I agree with this premise, and I refuse to. No, it was fine. You were meant to do that. It was a mental exercise, and it forced you to become better at it, and it forced you to have these kind of mental muscles you developed of being able to entertain arguments, even if you weren't ultimately going to accept them.
Right. And the more you do it, the more fun it becomes, because your brain starts taking pleasure at being good at doing that. So if we are actually trying to exercise the muscle that is required to overcome the anxiety, to basically, soften or the edges of the stress that happens in cognitive dissonance, training the muscle of taking or presenting positions that you disagree with is great. Because suddenly the pleasure of making an argument that you initially think is wrong outweighs your desire to slacken cognitive dissonance. I think, at least for me, it does, and I highly recommend that as an exercise. It makes your, it could lead to radical contrarianism, obviously, where you at some point, the more people agree with a point, the more you feel like you have to disagree with it, even when the point is, I think democracy is important.
Stress test it.
Yeah.
Just to stress test it. This seems like a good way to handle a long car ride. If you agree with whoever you're sitting next to, go, I am going to adopt the alternate position and argue it as smartly as I can. I am going to, as cleverly and rationally as possible, argue the position that democracy is a bad system, or whatever the thing is, right? And just see how it works. And it's actually, it's difficult, and it can be funny too. So when I was in college, this also won't surprise you, Adaam, I hosted a radio show. And one of the segments I had on the radio show was called Monkey versus Robot. And I would take a conservative friend and a progressive friend, and I would give them prompts, but the only rule was the conservative had to pretend to be a smart progressive, and the progressive had to pretend to be a smart conservative. And it was funny because it was very difficult for people to do it for more than 3 sentences. They would go for a minute, and they would just trip up because you could tell these very intelligent people had built their minds like steel traps around these particular ideas, and getting them to think outside of that box was comedically difficult.
So do you think that the problem was that they couldn't get out of their own patterns of thought, or that because it was in a public setting, they felt embarrassed to be seen making those arguments of the other side?
I don't know. I'm not sure. And also, probably I just did a poor job of hosting it. But I think either one of those things could be a factor. And I do think being in public changes the nature of discourse. I've talked about on this program before that I think that's one of the reasons Twitter is so horrible. Is that if you and I, Adaam, the other night, like you and Batya and her husband got into some inter-Israeli disputes about the nature of Judaism. You're for anybody unfamiliar with this, you're Israeli and also Jewish, and so you guys are getting into this. And I can participate a little bit, but I don't know enough to really wade into this particular issue. We're all friends. We're all having a good time. So it's not as if that was emotionally high stakes, but you were able to argue. It would have been qualitatively different if there'd been a crowd watching, or if you'd been online, or if, in particular, you didn't know each other, you weren't friends, and you were both representing 2 different crowds. And I'm lost on what the crowds would be because I don't know inter-Israeli political discourse well enough to say who's the Likud party and all that kind of thing. But I think that does change it, and that brings in a whole host of other things about kind of your standing in the tribe, your commitment to the tribe, and things of that nature.
And that also triggers honor culture, the honor culture part of your brain, because suddenly you need to defend that idea. It's not just ego; it's the understanding that there are social stakes to your position, and it's one of the. I don't know if you've read The Elephant in the Brain, but it's a wonderful book that
is it Jonathan Haidt?
It's not the. But I think
he uses that metaphor. I need to bring it back.
His metaphor is the rider, right? The emotion,
right?
Like the elephant is the emotional part and the driver is the rational the rider is the rational thinking that he's stirring the mind, but he's actually being carried by the elephant. I also thought about that.
We are not rational. We are rationalizing. We
Exactly.
tend to make emotional decisions, and then we justify themselves to our after the fact. Actually, I'll take a brief divot, and then we'll swing back to cognitive dissonance. At the party that we met at, Adaam, Were you able to speak to the very intelligent, stunning Australian woman? I can't remember her name, but were you able to talk to her? You know what I'm talking about?
No, I think I missed an Australian woman.
Well, it was a shame. She was delightful. One of the things she brought up, kind of on the note of honor culture that you just mentioned, or triggering that sense of honor within your tribe, is she had been she's a psychiatrist or was a psychiatrist and was reading some literature talking about how in groups have a phenomenon where people will display their fealty to their tribe by believing increasingly crazy things.
So
As a way to sort of show, like, here's how much I believe in the Libertarian Party, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, whatever the thing is. I believe in it so much that I'm going to say this clearly batshit thing that everyone else in the world would think is nuts, but is in sync with, like, I am the most version of our tribe taken to the extreme. It's clearly ludicrous when you take our position to the extreme, but I'm going to take it because that's how committed I am to our tribe. And it's almost like you're saying, like, I'm willing to prostrate my intelligence before the altar of our tribe. I'm willing to sacrifice my rationalism to our group to show the fidelity that I have to our
That's
group.
the logic of when pundits were scrambling to explain that defund the police doesn't mean actual defunding police. That's right. Suddenly you'll see the op-ed saying, no, it actually literally means defund them. I stand, like, no half measures. Defund it, no policing. That's the logic of it. The person who felt this is my window to show just how, like, I am more radical than Robespierre.
Yeah, or like, I mean, like me being a gentleman of moderate temperament and classical liberal bearing within the American context, it's a lot easier for me to spot stupidity in fascists and communists since they're not as close to home. But like you can see these things where, like, there's a film called Downfall where it's the last days of Hitler in a bunker, and I think it's Goebbels talking or something where they're clearly going to do something nuts. Like I mean, in addition to all the nutty things, just from a tactical perspective, this is a very bad tactical decision they're about to do. And one of the Nazis goes, no, like they're arming like one-legged old men or something that like clearly can't win the battle. And the guy goes, no, they will win because their dedication to fascism will carry them through the cause. I mean, it's nuts, but it's also this way of like, that's how dedicated to fascism I am. I think these one-legged old guys will be able to defeat the British army. Or you see this in the Soviet Union, where just crazy thing like the Soviet Union at one point basically outlawed Darwinian evolution, because Darwinian evolution, I shouldn't say they outlawed, they outlawed the teaching of Darwinian evolution. This is one of the fallacies that our statist friends can oftentimes get into, is believing they can literally reshape the laws of the universe. They attempted to ban Darwinian evolution's teaching in favor of this kind of different Soviet one that involved, well, no, you can actually change your genome if you work hard enough. And like, but it was like, this is clearly nuts, but you could get some social credit for it.
Oh, I think that was the easy part. When they tried to ban hyphenation, that's when they really got serious.
Well, okay, so
but I actually want to ask you. I want to ask you something.
Sure. Yeah,
this is something that I've been thinking about. When you first heard the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, what did you take as the message?
I think my takeaway of the Emperor's New Clothes is the pitfalls of self-flattery and sycophantism. Because the emperor is naked, but he's being told that his clothes are just so light that nobody can see them. They're the best clothes in the world. He's believing it because all of his courtiers are puffing up his ego. And meanwhile, there's some amount of people that are such sycophants that they're willing to parade this lunacy.
It's interesting. So you saw sycophancy as the reason why the courtiers were also like seeing the clothes, right? They
yes.
Growing up, I took it as the power of mass delusion, basically, and in the sense that people really bought into the story, and seeing that everybody else buys into the story, accepted it, and thought, well, maybe if I don't see it, it reflects badly on me because it does mean that I'm stupid, like the same logic as the emperor, and I don't want to be called out as stupid, so I have to buy into this, because surely if everyone else believes it, then it is true. And I only recently realized that there's a reading of it that is your version of it, that everybody but the king realizes that the emperor is being scammed, but nobody's going to tell him, because they understand that the social stakes involved are too high, and the first person that even intimates that there's a scam afoot is going to lose their head. But the more you acknowledge how gorgeous those garments are, the higher, the bigger your chances at rising in court. So that's your take, and for me, it's new. I wonder if it's the transatlantic divide. I wonder if in Israel you think about mass delusions, and in the Anglosphere you think more of the of sycophancy.
It could well be. There also might be. Do you ever read a Robert Heinlein?
No.
Okay, there's a book. I think it's Job. Where he's comedically retelling Job in some capacity. But he makes a point early on in the book, it's a throwaway observation that stuck with me, where he says that when civilians ride military vessels and they're invited to dine, they always assume they should sit at the officer's table. And I was like, that's me. If I were on a ship and you get to go to the mess hall, I would just assume, well, of course, me being me, I should be sitting at the officer's table, even though I don't, like, there's been plenty of situations in life where I'm the equivalent of an enlisted man. I probably am right now, right? But we tend to have that. I wonder if there's not something built into the American experience or the British experience or the Anglosphere, however you want to say it, of I am the main character or close to it. Therefore, I'm seeing this as I am probably the emperor. In this solution, or I'm one of the courtiers of the emperor, as opposed to seeing it as a big, broad, delusional situation.
Interesting. Or it's the emphasis of the individualistic perspective, and from the from the individual perspective, obviously nobody would really believe that, but they would play along if they think that it could give him a leg up.
Right, and you definitely have. I mean, like. Kim Jong-un, I would love to have a conversation with that man.
For sure.
No one's ever told him how stupid his haircut looks. He looks like a jackass. Like, there's no way to he looks like a moron. Literally no one his entire life has ever told him his haircut is not the best haircut that's ever been made, ever been crafted by human hands. His haircut, if there are gods, they have hair that attempts to look like in that level of flattery that you've got. Because again, what gain do you have telling Kim Jong-un he looks like a moron? They're going to kill you, murder your family. You want to flatter them, right? So like there is this incredible informational degradation and warping that's occurring around them.
And I would buy that they believe it at some point. At some point they're looking at this and they... How many times do you need to tell the lie in order to absorb it, especially when you're talking about aesthetic preferences? Who are you to even... It's not even who are you to tell Kim Jong-un, it's who are you to tell the gods that they are wrong to think that this is the ideal or aspirational haircut, right? If the gods want to have that style...
There's that line, I forget the man, I think it's Upton Sinclair who said it's very difficult to teach a man something if his livelihood depends on not understanding it. So imagine if you get your head chopped off, then yes, it would exacerbate that. But I will bring it back to cognitive dissonance, though, because I've got a few more questions I want to lob at you. It would seem to me that there's a difference. I don't know that this does not qualify as cognitive dissonance or whether it's just a subset, like we're talking about different elements of cognitive dissonance. It would seem to me there's a difference between contradictory data versus contradictory paradigms. So like I just did a bonus episode on this program where one of my friends came on and we talked about why libertarians and Marxists kind of get along surprisingly well. Case in point, Batya and I get along really well. I come from this classical liberal free market invisible hand approach. She comes from a Marxist class warfare approach. And part of the theory that we had was even though we disagree on things, we're kind of speaking the same language and we're both looking at the world economically. So when
the materialist interpretation of history.
Yes. So when she says, no, that's wrong. Whatever she says that's wrong, I can fit into the peg I already have in my mind. It's just a different peg, right? But that's different than when somebody has just a completely different paradigm and they've got a different worldview of, no, it's actually about gender relations and it's about power hierarchies and it's about words and things like that. Well, that's very foreign to that materialist worldview, right? So do you tend to find that having your worldview or your paradigm confronted by an alternate model is more stressful for you than having contrary data?
Well, contrary data is both the easiest and the most difficult to tackle, because contrary data could often be rebutted with more contrary data. Data is very malleable in many debates, and if you know enough of how a particular game is played, you can figure out how to respond. And especially when people talk about economics, we know how easy it is for people to just think of all the I forgot what's it's the modern monetary theory, right?
Modern
monetary theory.
That's the. I really should do an episode on that because I don't know enough about it to say the dismissive thing I'm about to say, which is probably a way of me dealing with cognitive dissonance. But from where I'm at, it sounds like money comes from wherever money comes from, and you can print as much as you want because
if you read their work, there's a lot of thought and a lot of supposed data that goes into it. So data can be used by very smart people to say a lot of dumb shit. Speaking of cognitive dissonance, there was the Ezra Klein interview recently where he mentions, wow, we had a chance. We got all the policies that we wanted. We passed so much of what we wanted to pass, and the economy is failing. Why is that? That was one of those moments where you see cognitive dissonance on display in real time, and it's fascinating. I loved.
Is that his talk with Larry Summers?
So,
yeah. So Larry Summers, Harvard economist, I think maybe the former president of Harvard, and Larry Summers is one of the only people that's been saying, "Hey, if you keep injecting money into the economy, you're going to increase the monetary supply and cause inflation." He's been one of the few dissenting voices on the actions of the Fed, and so he went on Ezra Klein's show and was kind of going, yeah, like you're wanting to do all of these beneficial programs, but they're in fact hurting on a macro level, which in turn hurts all the people that you want to help, and Ezra having to struggle with that. So I'm told. I didn't actually listen to the interview, but recently saw my economics mentor in New York and told me about it.
Yeah, it's just a fun little moment, and I think mostly Ezra actually handled it honorably, but it was interesting now to read. I only read the transcript. By the way, in contrast, I was thinking of examples of cognitive dissonance in the public sphere. One of my favorites is, and I don't know how I didn't think of it in real time. Day after, was it after the day of the inauguration or the day after, when Sean Spicer goes out in 2016?
Oh, right, yeah.
Has the two pictures of Obama's inauguration and Trump's inauguration, and he is sent there to tell the world, America and the world, that Trump had more people in attendance in his inauguration. The pictures belie that argument. Your lying eyes are telling you something else, but Sean Spicer is there, sweating angrily to make this point. And I was watching it at the CNN control room at the time, and I remember people were like booing and getting angry around me, and I was like, it's just this fascinating, because this is not just one layer of cognitive dissonance. This is at least second order of cognitive dissonance, because it begins with Trump unable to reconcile his identity of himself as the champion of humanity's Everest, right? The peak. And potentially here's a metric by which he's not number one. He has to set the record straight. He has to fix people's perception of himself. And so he sends down his mouthpiece, and Sean Spicer, press secretary at the time, goes out and has to do it. But he also knows that there's a layer of cognitive dissonance, and you see the stress and you see the pain in his. And this is what Melissa McCarthy actually did. I think this is why SNL's impression of Sean Spicer was the one funny thing that SNL did in the past 5 years, is because the joke wasn't just that he was lying, which was duh. The joke was that here's a man at the throes of cognitive dissonance, and he's losing it. He's like struggling to contain it, and it's, I don't know. I think it's just this is humanity at its funniest. That's totally a side point. So I didn't mean to avoid your question. Your question was about facts versus paradigms, right? So facts, I think, are malleable. And it's easier to debate facts when, like you said, you have somewhat shared paradigms of what are the terms that we are discussing. Though I would say that a lot of the gender and racial debate also exists in the Marxist economic philosophy, because when they think about equity, they, or at least the more serious people on that side are not just talking about microaggressions. That's the BuzzFeed version of it, right? That's the embarrassing. Don't do manspreading. That's the manspreading videos. Yeah, everybody. I mean, I think most of the people in the universe know that the BuzzFeed feminism and BuzzFeed leftism is a joke. But the serious people will still talk about equity as a question of distribution of resources that fits within the libertarian Marxist paradigm, I suspect.
I think with most of those things, we're talking more about a locus or an origin point or a priority of constellations as opposed to just one tiny thing. But I do think overall, though, that having your landscape challenged is much more stressful than having a feature of the landscape challenged. I suspect that's why. So my undergraduate was in history and world religions, and you tend to see in religious conflict the anger and the violence tends to be for people that are pretty close to you. So like, I'm sure there are flashpoints between Buddhism and Catholicism just historically that have occurred, but generally speaking, you don't hear about Buddhism versus Catholic being a thing because it just doesn't really fit. Like Catholic versus Protestant, where I have this very specific worldview, and there's somebody else that kind of agrees that my worldview is mostly correct, but there's some big problems with it. That's now calling into question my worldview. We got to go kill them. Whereas like you're Hindu, no, that's too far. Like that's so far afield that's not going to make me. I don't have to think that hard if you're a Hindu and I'm a Catholic.
So you're saying that you do need to exist within some shared paradigm for the dissonance to even matter.
Yeah, I think if it were completely, well, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. Yeah, because I am contradicting myself here. I suppose I'm
instinctively, I agree more with your second point. I think if because I think that I would have expected a Marxist and a I think the reason that Marxists and libertarians get well together is the Bhatia type Marxists, the old school materialists. The reason that you get well together is more because of the absolute clown show that has happened outside of these outside of you. I think it's just the confluence of stupidity between Trumpian identitarianism and a college identitarianism. I don't know what to call it. Lefty identitarianism is so patently stupid and so patently vacuous. I shouldn't say that. There is some legitimacy.
No, I agree with that. I think they're both fairly vacuous.
I think there. I mean, I can give credit to some thoughts on both on both the Trumpism and
there's some points to
be made. Let's put it that way. But ultimately, I think it's just it makes everybody who was having a more like serious discussion previously and still maintains the terms that they want to argue on, like libertarians and Marxists, feel that, well, historically we would have been at each other's throats, but right now these guys they're thrown us into the same little tent. So right now we can just sit together, have a drink, and laugh at the absurdity that is raging outside of our little beautiful protected tent. I think that's what's happening more than materialism in itself.
It could be. Well, to backtrack slightly though, with religions that are alike or unlike, do you think there's much to that? Like another
100%.
theory I'll run by you.
I mean,
you're a good person to ask this by virtue of being Jewish and an Israeli. When you look at the Protestant Reformation, by the way, I'm not trying to fling mud at any particular religion. Blah 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 blah. When you look at the Protestant,
you try to fling mud at all of them.
I'm flinging about all of them. Initially, Martin Luther, who begins the Protestant Reformation, initially thinks the Jews are all going to convert now. The reason that they haven't converted is because Catholicism screwed things up. Now that we've cleaned out the church, the Jews will recognize the blindingly obvious call of Christianity, and they'll come over. And then
he was so angry when it didn't happen. He was so mad.
Yeah,
so mad.
Right. And I think on top, like, and again, like the Jews are then inducing that cognitive dissonance of, like, that's if there are just people visiting that are Hindu or Taoist or whatever. Well, that doesn't really call into question our particular paradigm. That yeah, they're heathens or whatever. But if the Jews haven't got on board yet, what does that say about our religion? They're all supposed to have converted by now. Is there something wrong with our religion? I don't know. We should probably
that's the origin story of Christianity. One of the arguments to the sources of anti-Semitism historically is that the intransigence of the Jewish community that didn't go along with the new Jews.
I'm so sorry. I just adopted a dog that sings to ambulances, so I'm very, very sorry.
The ambulance serenader. Ambulance Serenade. That's your indie movie, Andrew.
Gosh, I'm sorry. All right, hold on. You good, Wallace?
Eric, you better be keeping that in the post-credit scene.
Yeah, we'll keep that one on Patreon. We'll try to cut that one out for the main feed. I'm so sorry. I believe you had just said, Adaam, that a theory on the origins of anti-Semitism.
One of the theories of where anti-Semitism, the inception of anti-Semitism as part of Christian European lore is the insufferable, inexplicable intransigence of the Judean Jewish community. Their unwillingness to get along with the new program, with the new St. Paulian program. Come on.
Which again raises question, what's going on here? Why aren't you on board with the program? Our program is correct, isn't it? The fact that you haven't adopted our program means we might not be correct, but we are correct. We know we're correct. So, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have to make sure that our worldview is in fact the reality around us, and so we are going to get rid of the irritants that are warping that worldview or causing us to question it.
But to your question, this is exactly because Christianity is the daughter of Judaism. When pagans didn't get along with the program, so when Christians didn't get along with Roman paganism, they were just the Christians were just thrown into the Colosseum to be eaten by lions. It's no problem. Problem solved. Like, we don't need to think about it. And same in the reverse. When the Roman Empire turned Christian, whenever pagans were encountered that were not willing to be assimilated into the Christian system, we can just kill them. That's not a problem. We don't need to tell a whole story about it. Judaism is a different matter. Judaism is... This is our origin story as a religion, and these assholes are still like there to be contrarians, to be jackasses. Similar, by the way, with all of the what do you call them? All the Christian heresies like Arianism and Cathars later on.
Religions always hate heretics more than they hate heathens.
Right.
Always. Heretics are always going to be more oppressed than heathens are, because you are, on a theological level, a heathen is a liar, but a heretic is perverting the truth. And on a psychological level, the heathen is incorrect, but the heretic is invoking cognitive dissonance.
Right. That's why Putin is only interesting in the American discourse to bash the other party. Putin is only relevant for Democrats as a symbol for this is what Republicans are really trying to do. They don't deeply care about authoritarianism in the East. It's not it's not their main. We know that it's not the main priority of the Democratic Party because we see how much attention is being given to China. So it's not really about a true commitment to democracy or liberal values. Not only that, there are still grains of Noam Chomskyism and American isolationism in the left, and America should not arrogantly impose its liberal values around the world. Surely, who are we to do that? And fuck you, Commentary Magazine neocons. But suddenly they care about Putin. They only care about Putin because he is he can be a proxy for heretics at home. That's the only thing that matters. And the same applies to the right, because the only reason that the right, largely speaking, I'm generalizing, cares about the Uyghurs in China isn't because they care about Muslim minorities or because they really care about authoritarianism in the East either. It's because they need a proxy to bash Disney with, or Apple, or whatever.
Or attach Democrats to
or
communists.
To attach Democrats to
this
communists.
Is what's going to happen if you do your Democratic things. Yeah. We're going to wrap up in a minute.
Oh my God! And you didn't even ask me about what's the difference between cognitive dissonance that I salute and celebrate and the Orwellian cognitive dissonance of doublespeak. I was waiting for that question.
You know what? That was going to be the last question. However, let's go ahead and... Well, I'm going to keep that for the last question.
Okay.
I trust my instincts. I was going to say, does ambiguity itself invoke cognitive dissonance? Because there's a difference between, I think, I am, of course, an Anabaptist, and you are a Catholic, and that's causing cognitive dissonance because we have these contrary worldviews that overlap enough to cause that friction. But does ambiguity itself invoke cognitive dissonance, or must the ambiguity be in relation to something else?
I think
While you're thinking about that, I'll tell you why it comes to my mind. Is I have a theory that at the moment, part of the rancor people have for transgender people is because it doesn't fit into the paradigms that are widespread culturally. So at the moment, I think most Americans have come on board with homosexuality, or at least on a day-to-day
Though
level.
we're seeing a relapse.
But I have heard that, unfortunately. But I think for most people, they can go, okay, I'm a guy, that's a gal, that guy likes other guys. Okay, I know how to do that math in my head. But okay, I'm a guy, that's a gal, but it looks to me like a guy. I'm not sure anymore. Andrea, who is going to join us earlier, that you met earlier, is gender non-binary. And that's even more confusing because I could at least have got the strings right to figure out how that was going to work previously. But this one kind of calls into question how I understand gender. So like for a lot of people, most people I know are to some extent hedonists and would say if you're an adult, as long as you're not hurting anybody, I don't particularly care. But if you're messing with the definition of gender, you're not just doing your own thing. You're forcing me to reevaluate how I see the world, and you're invoking cognitive dissonance in my landscape of what I think reality consists of, which is going to irritate me.
I see that as connecting to your question about paradigms. So I think the thing about cognitive dissonance, I love using that word because, first of all, it has a negative connotation. So being a proud crusader for cognitive dissonance ticks people off, and that's fun. So, but
you're not trolling. You're just looking to stimulate the brain and go merrily into the storm.
Yeah. And have fun merrily. Yeah.
To invoke some religious theological imagery, Adaam.
Yes.
When St. Peter came to Christ, he walked through the storm on the water, right? Like he walked toward. I lost it. There was this really good sermon I heard years ago. I apologize, everybody. If you heard it though, it was really good. Please continue.
Remind me to tell you a little maybe when we wrap up a little Jewish story to counteract all of this, like all this Jesus wins that you're throwing at me. Those wins of Jesus jihad that you're.
Well, I'm still hoping to convert, as we talked about earlier. So we'll use this as an entree, and then maybe eventually I'll get a petition.
But obviously, cognitive dissonance is just is an oversimplification of a myriad of complications and tensions that we encounter. So what you're describing shows how cognitive dissonances can compound and how over time we chart individually and also societally paths of avoidance or paths of resolution to feel more comfortable with the cognitive dissonance of yesteryear, and in the process discover new ones. You can also see it as the Hegelian dialectic in some sense, right? We had the thesis, antithesis, and now we are in the synthesis, which will encounter new objections. So that to me is just intuitively is very normal and very healthy. To be the fact that we are having this question about gender binary is, if it weren't for the total puerile, callow, stupid, embarrassing, exhausting nature, and not to mention violent, belligerent, aggressive, and inquisitional nature of the discourse, I'd say is a good thing. If it weren't for those caveats.
Yeah. It applies to a lot of things, yeah.
But in theory, I think that's good. It means that we found some sort of equilibrium as a society, and societies can't really fully exist, not anytime soon, I assume, in true cognitive dissonance. My advocacy for cognitive dissonance is for individuals, for people who are having these arguments, for people who wade into argument with the Ben Shapiro on Twitter, or with their angry uncle on Thanksgiving or the Passover Seder. I want them to be more tolerant of the inconsistencies in themselves and in their communities and in the conversations that they're having. And I think that could scale up to something better for society, but I don't think that society can really be in that balance.
I'll pause you. So one of the conversations I have with one of my frequent collaborators, Justin Robert Young, I don't know that we so much disagree, but we have a different viewpoint on this. Justin sees the immense argumentation and rancor that we have in the United States as a kind of superpower, that basically we are stress testing ourselves constantly, and that partisan clash compels us to move in a positive direction and investigate things. We really overdo it, right? I am not so sure. Like you bring up a great point, Adaam, that we've mostly been talking about this as an individual in regards to his or her group. We've not been talking about this as groups themselves. And one of the big things that we're seeing in terms of cognitive dissonance and why there's so much rancor in American politics right now is you do have two competing origin stories and ethoses of the United States. And that is causing cognitive dissonance all the time. The traditional story of the United States is that it was founded in opposition to tyranny and as an ever-expanding promise of equality before the law and democracy that more and more peoples have been enfranchised into, and that the United States is a force for good that has had dark chapters. And the other origin story for the United States is it was founded on slavery and tyranny. It is at root something that is patriarchal and racist, and it is, for the most part, bad, but with occasional bright spots. And these are incompatible worldviews. And so when you start talking to people that have a different worldview, it's not like we can just go, well, we all agree that police should do better. If I'm coming at it from the perspective of America's mostly not racist and there are racists, and you're coming from the perspective of, no, it's mostly racist and there's a few goodies in there, there's going to be friction there, because whenever we talk to each other, we're going to invoke that cognitive dissonance in the other person because I am calling your landscape, your worldview into question.
This is exactly the point. And I hope that I can tie it into your point about paradigms and give an answer that doesn't seem like I skirted your question. I think that this is really where I'm interested in cognitive dissonance, where I think I really started thinking of myself as the cognitive dissonance crusader was my studies were history and law, and I was fascinated with the legal history of colonialism, and and in the process, I also studied back in 2010 the 1990s version of critical legal theory at the time. And I really found it fascinating. And in the graduate class that I was in, and that's back in Israel. So when I'm looking at critical theory at the time, it's me looking anthropologically at a foreign country and how they go about their business, and just being fascinated by the way that ideas collapse under their own burden or under their own internal contradictions. And I found it beautiful, because critical legal theory, some of the arguments that they make against the Enlightenment tradition and liberalism is great. It's profound. There is so much to be said in defense of critical legal theory as a vision that we need to adopt. Jacques Berzun, the French historian who wrote From Dawn to Decadence, uses occasionally the phrase double vision, having that double vision. So adopting that as the second vision of the world is valuable, seeing how much complacency we have about our own assumptions in terms of what constitutes right and wrong, just and unjust, free even, challenging the casual cliches that we utter constantly in liberalism, freedom, challenging where it comes from and what it means, who it applies to. That's valuable. And it's the same type of
yeah. No, the other day I was in an event. It was really cool. It was this party. I met a treasure hunter. He's probably going to come on the show in a bit. But somebody made this pot shot. Like, they were introducing themselves, and they were like talking about ideas. Sometimes there's horrible ideas, like the Enlightenment. And I was like, what? And I went up and grabbed him afterwards, and I was like, hey man, like, I'm very much an Enlightenment kid. I'm very pro Enlightenment. I think it was great. People have been sending me, thanks people that listen to the show, they've been sending me links to busts for Adam Smith and John Locke that I'll probably put in. So I was like, I'm not mad. I don't want to fight you. I just want to know where you're coming from, because I thought we all kind of agreed the Enlightenment was good, and it was fascinating, and he made some good points and made me think about stuff. I've not abandoned it. I'm still going to get those busts, but he was like, all right, there's some interesting points to be made here.
For sure. And I think it does two things. It enriches our understanding of the Enlightenment and our current interfacing with that legacy. But it also is remarkably a product of the Enlightenment, which is also fascinating. And that when you start noticing the internal contradictions of critical legal theory, it's because they are not really just what's the word I'm looking for? Relativistic theories of each group should have its own autonomy and its own power justified by its own, unique legacy. They do signal at a more universal concept of justice and freedom and equality that is the story of the Enlightenment. So they use Enlightenment thinking to justify their undermining of Enlightenment thinking, and that's cognitive dissonance. That's the cognitive dissonance of the Enlightenment, and it's the cognitive dissonance of critical theory, and the way that they belong in each other, or it is the same way that Protestantism was there at the crucifixion, right? The idea of rebelling against the priesthood, the rebelling against the clergy, was part of the reason that Jesus went and what did he do? He upturned the stalls, the market, right? Because all of that were too busy commercializing the property of the Lord. So he had to make a point. He had to do some terrorism in order to make his point. And then there we go, 500, 600, 700 years later. Actually, more than that, the Catholic Church does the same thing. So, of course, you're going to get Protestantism. The contradiction existed at inception. And that's the beauty of cognitive dissonance, because we don't really, as humans, follow a path towards justice or a path towards righteousness. We are just constantly struggling with recurring inconsistencies in our ability to exist in the world. And the moment we start tolerating that and see it as something that is beautiful, rather than something that needs to get us into a civil war, I think we can actually do something productive. If Americans on the right stop seeing critical legal theory as an existential threat, and critical race theorists stop talking about whiteness as if it's a cancer that needs to be eradicated.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is so much merit in the marriage of Enlightenment values and the ability to also internally criticize and see the folly and hypocrisy of Enlightenment values.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, stuff that like I'm fairly dismissive of the concept of cultural appropriation. However, I'll say like it makes sense in some contexts.
You don't like
right?
when people
so, like,
eat Huggies, for instance.
yeah. I'm okay with people, eating, if what you're saying by cultural appropriation is it is offensive for somebody to take something sacred to a culture and commercialize it or make fun of it in a profane way, a la. I'm going to put a crucifix in a jar of piss as an artistic statement, or I'm going to take an Indian headdress that's sacred to a particular tribe and use it to sell tobacco. I'm like, yeah, that actually makes sense to me. Conversely, white people can't braid their hair in a particular way because black people do that. You're not allowed to play a banjo unless you're from like that stuff's nonsensical, right? But it's a situation where I can go, a huge amount of the things that I'm hearing about cultural appropriation are just sort of re-microwaved segregation that are at best nonsensical, at worst retrogressive.
Right.
But even then, there are these elements within that I can go, yes, that is a good point that you're making there. I disagree that to the extent you're taking it. Now, because we do have to wrap up.
But take it to the abortion question as well. Pro-choice. I can't imagine that anybody who's pro-choice, which I consider myself, will, if they're being totally sincere, will say that I have no... I can't fathom, I can't understand the argument of the pro-life argument at its best. And you have to accept that this is a dissonance that you have to live with. There is no solution. Like, you can deny it, you can be in complete denial and imagine that there is no question in this problem, there is no dilemma, but there is. And you have to live your life as if you've chosen your commitments in terms of who you vote for and what kind of laws you want to see enacted in your states. But internally, you will have to live with this inconsistency or with this problem. And I think we'll just be better off as a polity if we acknowledge it. Yes, I acknowledge that in accepting pro-choice, I also potentially subscribe to, at the extreme, the murder of unborn children. That is just an inherent fact of being part of pro-choice. And vice versa. If you're part of pro-life, you also potentially subscribe to the harm caused to families who did not want to have children, not to mention the bodies of women. Those are contradictions that cannot be eradicated, and rather than being denied or pushed off to the recesses of your brain, should be accepted. And we live with them. And once we understand that we all live with these contradictions, it makes it, I don't know, at least gives us a bit of a humbling in terms of how we talk to each other.
So, final question for you, Adaam. That thing you said about doublethink. Answer that, please. Please repeat your question and then answer.
So, I kind of anticipated that you're going to ask me, because
I wrote it down.
Most people think of cognitive dissonance, and not unjustifiably, they consider cognitive dissonance to be the Orwellian, or it's not consider. Most people's encounter of cognitive dissonance as an intellectual political phrase is from 1984, and the idea of doublethink, of having two contradictory ideas at the same time,
simultaneously holding two contradictory ideas. Yeah.
And yeah, that is a form of cognitive dissonance. And I guess if I ever write the grand theory of cognitive dissonance, we have to catalog or separate what I see as the Spinozian cognitive dissonance, which is my version, which is the version that sees the world as deterministic and doesn't believe in free will, but also implores us to act as if there is free will, as if our choices do matter and carry consequences. That's the fundamental force. And then there's the Orwellian cognitive dissonance, which is, I am going to use my capacity to be at peace with contradiction in order to create total chaos. And out of this chaos, I'm going to exert power over you. And a modern example of this, obviously, is I was thinking about this also, was in the in the summer of 2020, when the Democratic establishment wasn't merely embracing absurd and self-destructive political ideas like we mentioned, like defund the police. It was also embarking on a holy war to purge dissidents and free thought from its midst, as we've seen people being fired, people being shut down, and that's like created a lot of anxiety, sometimes over anxiety on the right. But it was happening. The left was on sort of an intellectual holy war during that summer, and all while using doublespeak to deny that any of this was happening. Like, there is no such thing as cancel culture. If you're talking about this, if you're worried about this, you are fanatical. You are a Trumpian. And that's not the dissonance, obviously, that I want to celebrate. This is not the dissonance of...
No, you're talking about a kind of intellectual courage that allows you to confront things that make you uncomfortable. As opposed to a kind of intellectual servitude that allows you to forfeit your abilities in order to accept that which you've been told.
Was a willingness to sit... the unwillingness to sit in discomfort. I want to sit in the discomfort. What they were doing was weaponizing dissonance and to create the word chaos in order to eliminate dissent. And that's bad. That is bad. They were trying to, establish an intellectual priesthood as the sole arbiter of truth. And when you have that idea that this center of power is the only arbiter of rightness and justice, it is the antithesis of cognitive dissonance. It's just exploiting cognitive dissonance in order to actually creating a form of absolute truthism that just has nothing to do with reality and everything to do about who gets to exert power.
Well, I will end the show there. Unfortunately, I'm doing another interview. I could talk to you for another couple of hours, Adaam. It's been a pleasure. What is your podcast?
My podcast is Uncertain Things.
Uncertain Things. And if people have thoughts on pro-choice versus pro-life or your interpretation of Christianity, and they didn't want to email me about them, they wanted to contact you, not me, you, would they find you on Twitter? What would be the best way to engage with you?
I guess, and you can reach out on Twitter, Amsterdam Lost or Uncertain Pod. Uncertain Pod probably is the best way. It was a pleasure, Andrew.
All right. A pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye. Friends, not a lot of shows go out of their way to make listeners feel uncomfortable, but I sure do. Probably not the smartest idea I've come up with, but here we are. You made it to the end of the episode. Congratulations. Which is why I want to call upon you to support and fund this show. You can do that via Patreon by going to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. You'll not only make the show possible, you'll also get access to free bonus episodes. This week, very happy about this, I did my first ever true crime podcast about Vernon, California, and all of the malfeasance that accompanied that feudal domain pretending to be a city in Los Angeles County, California. It involves embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and a corpse. If you want to check it out, you can become a supporter of the show, get access to that and other bonus episodes. Listen, if I were a big corporate property, I'd just have General Electric sell some more dishwashers and give me some advertising money, but I'm not. I'm not that. I'm just a fellow political orphan huddled with you in the depths of a Victorian soup kitchen. So step up, support the show. Head to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. Thanks. That's the show. Thank you, Adaam Levin-Areddy, for coming on to talk about cognitive dissonance. Thank you, Eric Stipe, who edited today's program. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.